And look, did I expect anything? No. Did I expect anything? Genuinely, no. But it is still a little bit of a concern that basically Tiffany Hayes responded by blocking anyone to mention it and laughing it off. That's still a bit of a concern. But if you guys don't know the scenario, basically something that reads like a threat to Caitlin Clark. Tiffany Hayes responded by joking.
Ignore the backlash. Brush it off. Keep scrolling. That seems to be the strategy right now. Meanwhile, the league office has remained totally quiet. Completely quiet. And that's exactly why this situation deserves a...
Space for hate is selective. It is very, very selective, and like we all know that. We all know that that it's hate towards certain players is fine. Like you can say and do what you want towards Caitlin, towards Sophie Cunningham, towards Aaliyah, who play for the Fever, to an extent. Like I know obviously the whole Angel situation wasn't a the fake crowd, the fake noises, whatever about Angel, but like plenty of players.
Selective. That's the word people keep returning to. The campaign slogan says, no space for hate, but the way that message is enforced tells a completely different story. Whenever players connected to the Indiana Fever become targets online, whenever Caitlin Clark receives abuse, or when Sophie Cunningham and Aaliyah Boston are hit with unnecessary hate, official accounts stay silent. Yet when the situation is reversed, the response suddenly arrives almost instantly. That inconsistency is not just annoying. It is the core issue everyone...
Disappointed, but I do hope WNBA have to put in some form of a rule about, you know, how players interact with fans on social media, because, again, look, I don't like mentioning it because there's always the, oh, could you be speaking this into existence by saying, like, is it going to take a Monica Seles situation to do anything? And the unfortunate thing is that it looks like there might have to be a statistic for the WNBA to take any action on these players on social media, because it's not what.
So that's the timeline people. That's the word people keep returning to. A burner account using the campaign slogan as a profile picture, no space for hate, something that many interpreted as a threat toward tells a completely different story. Veteran WNBA players connected to the Indiana Fever become targets online. The phrase, whenever Caitlin Clark receives abuse, once the backlash or when Sophie Cunningham and Aaliyah Boston, she responded by blocking critics instead of addressing accounts stay silent. That sequence Yet when the situation is reversed, it wasn't simply a random social media almost instantly. It reflected inconsistency. Type is not just annoying. Policies are it is the core issue everyone keeps pointing out.
Weird parasocial relationships are not a good thing. And again, even if these are, even if it is a joke, and not even if it is a joke, it's a joke. What Tiffany Hayes said was clearly a joke. I would hope that the post that she was responding to was a joke. But we don't know who's behind these random accounts. I don't know, you don't know, Tiffany Hayes doesn't know. It was a random burner account with a picture of Liberty players as their profile picture. If they are joking about physical harm towards another player, players can't be interacting with that. And it's something where it's like, the league has to do something about it in terms of the way players interact on social media.
Now imagine the exact same situation happening in another professional league. Ja Morant posts something similar aimed at a rival rookie. Anthony Edwards quote tweets a threatening post involving another player. Within 48 hours, there's a fine. Before the next game, there's probably a suspension. Adam Silver releases a statement. ESPN debates it non-stop for a week. Nobody shrugs it off as humor. Nobody hides behind free speech arguments. The NBA reacts because it understands that letting those posts slide creates a dangerous example for everyone else. That's why the double standard stands out so much here. This is the same league that launched a...
And I'm like, I feel like Tiffany Hayes crossed one of those like uncrossable lines. That being said, I do hope that even though they're not going to punish Tip Hayes for this, because there's no way that Twitter outrage has not been seen by the WNBA. They look at Twitter. Like, they literally started an investigation on an entire team based on someone who wasn't at the game making something up on Twitter. So they are, like, I can guarantee you WNBA have a team of chronically online people. And I'm going to be real here. There are a lot of crazy...
This is the important distinction people keep missing. Hayes' original repost was probably careless, maybe reckless, and almost certainly not intended as genuinely harmful. A veteran athlete likely saw an edgy post online, reacted impulsively with 2 quick words, and assumed it would disappear into the endless scroll of social media. That happens constantly online. But what happened afterward became the real issue. Thousands of users explained why the post crossed a line, yet Hayes never deleted it. She never apologized. She never clarified what she meant. Instead, she blocked people who criticized her and acted like the whole situation was a joke. That reaction transformed a careless social media lapse into something much bigger. The original action could have been dismissed as poor judgment. The response afterward made it look like contempt toward anyone who took the concern seriously.
I've known a lot about the Monica Seles situation and know how serious it can happen and know how easily it can happen, especially with how radicalized everyone is online. If you're not careful, and especially if you embolden people to think that you are on their if you're embolden crazy people to think that you are on their side, it's a matter of time before something happens to somebody, and I don't want to speak that into existence. And I think people are like, oh, it's going to be
Monica Seles, April 30th, 1993, Hamburg, Germany. During a changeover at a tennis match, a man named Gunter Parcher rushed out of the crowd, pulled a knife from a bag, and stabbed the #1 player in the world in the back. Seles was only 19 years old. She would miss more than 2 years of competitive tennis afterward. The attacker was obsessed with Steffi Graf and believed hurting Seles would somehow help the player he supported. That story is not some fictional warning. It is a real example of what can happen when unhealthy obsession around sports spirals into something dangerous. Every major sports league eventually learns this lesson. And the lesson is always identical. You do not ignore warning signs until after something serious happens.
And in fact, she doubled and tripled down on what she posted and almost laughed about it when the player she was essentially talking about has had massive stalker issues where, again, stalkers have showed up in her apartment building. There was a rumor that one of her stalkers pulled up in Puerto Rico into their hotel when they played. She's had to cancel meet and greets because stalkers have bought tickets to them. It is a concern, but I really do feel like these parasocial relationships between WNBA players and fans, and the good thing is that it's not happening with young players. You see it with
the documented history around this topic is already alarming. There have been stalkers appearing near player apartment buildings. A man was reportedly arrested in Indianapolis last summer following a Fever home game. There were reports of somebody following the team bus to a hotel in another city. Some fan events were even cancelled because security reviews flagged attendees with active restraining orders. This is not internet gossip. This is part of the real security environment the Indiana Fever organization has reportedly dealt with for 2 straight seasons. In that context, a veteran player publicly agreeing with what many interpreted as a threatening post is not a neutral action. Intent does not matter as much as impact. The same obsessive individuals already monitored by team security also saw that message. And from their perspective, they just watched a current WNBA player publicly validate
and it worked off that. But the league has to put a stop to it. I just felt like suspending Tiffany Hayes would have put a stop to it there and then. It would have put a stop to it there and then. But if the league says, you know what, we're not going to punish Tiffany Hayes, but instead we're going to put in a policy that tries to prevent something like this happening in the future, or if someone does this again, they'll be suspended. That's the same difference. That ends up being, that's the same outcome. However, if the league brushes this under the rug, they've just proven what we have said for years.
At this point, there are really only 2 reasonable paths forward, and the league eventually has to choose one. Option 1 is immediate discipline. A multi-game suspension that clearly establishes that publicly endorsing threatening content aimed at another player is punishable behavior. The benefit of that route is clarity. It creates a visible line every player immediately understands. Option 2 is a formal social media policy added into the next collective bargaining agreement. A written set of rules defining violations alongside specific fines and suspension guidelines. That route takes longer, but once it becomes part of the CBA, enforcement becomes permanent rather than improvised. What cannot continue is silence. Silence itself becomes a statement. And in this situation, silence sends the message that the rules are applied unevenly depending on who is involved. That's the outcome people should be most concerned about.
doesn't change. The problem is that when the percentage of people that are fans of something or viewers of something increases, while the percentage of crazy viewers doesn't change, the total amount of viewers, or the total amount of crazy people increases. The total amount of bad apples increases. Even though the percentage is the same, the amount increases. And again, all it takes is one. So I think the league needs to take this very seriously. If they don't want to go as far as to suspend Tiffany Hayes, that's fine. They need to put in something to stop this happening in the future. Because brushing this under the rug is bad for everybody. It's bad for apps.
And this leads to the bigger reason the conversation is not disappearing anytime soon. In any large audience, the percentage of unstable individuals usually stays relatively constant. What changes is the size of the audience itself. The Wnba averaged roughly 657,000 viewers per nationally televised game in 2024, more than triple the previous season's average. Indiana Fever home games sold out consistently throughout the year. Caitlin Clark road games were moved into NBA arenas because standard Wnba venues could not handle the demand. Merchandise sales reportedly exploded by hundreds of % on several product lines. National television ratings for the Wnba finals doubled compared to the prior season. All of that represents the kind of growth the league has wanted for decades. But every increase in popularity also increases the total number of obsessive personalities focusing intensely on individual players. The percentage may stay similar, but the raw numbers multiply dramatically. That is the reality of rapid growth. And that exposes a structural issue the league still has not publicly addressed. Many veteran Wnba players grew up in a completely different media environment. Smaller crowds, limited social media audiences, direct interaction with fans, familiar online communities, and a culture where athletes could personally engage with almost everyone who followed them. That world no longer exists. Today's ecosystem involves millions of impressions, viral clips spreading across Reddit and Discord, and enormous audiences that include people players may not recognize as unstable or dangerous. Younger players seem to understand this instinctively because they grew up managing nil brands and massive public attention from high school onward. They know what content to interact with and what to completely avoid. Many veterans are still operating under the older model. The Tiffany Hayes situation reflects